Folks, we study tonight the trial and execution of Jesus. It's lesson 12 in the study guide. It covers Mark chapter 14 verse 53 running through chapter 15 and verse 41. In the trial of Jesus, we see two main stages. And what are the two main stages in the trial of Jesus? You pick that up?
You're first in front of the priest, the chief priest.
All right. What group would that be? How? The Sanhedrin, and that would be the by nationality. What? The Jewish. And then the second stage of the trial, Roman. Now, what explains these two stages? Why was it necessary?
Because the Jews didn't want to be the ones responsible for Jesus' death. I think that they wanted to displace it onto the Roman government and get them to handle their dirty work, so to speak, for them.
The Jews couldn't kill him.
Yeah, that's not. Yeah, Sandy's on the track there. The passage that indicates the evidence on that is in John chapter 18 verse 31. Pilate tells them that you put him to death yourself, and they say, you know, it's not lawful for us to put anybody to death. So the political situation explains the two trials. And what was the political situation for the Jews at the time of Christ? All right, they were not an independent people. It's not like it was in the days of David and Solomon. They were a part of the Roman Empire, Roman overlords in control. They had, if it was a capital case, they were going to mete out the death penalty, then that had to be approved by Roman courts. And so we'll find as it moves from one stage to another that there's a slight change in the nature of the charges that are made against Jesus, because when they bring him before the Roman courts, they have to have a charge that is going to mean something to the Romans. It would get the death penalty from them. All right, now we begin then with the trial before the Sanhedrin, chapter 14, verses 53 to 65. And the questions, I think, if we have time to discuss them, will lead us right through this material and develop all the main points that need to be discussed. And they led Jesus away to the high priest, and there come together with him all the chief priests and the elders and the scribes. And Peter had followed him afar off, even within, into the court of the high priest. And he was sitting with the officers and warming himself in the light of the fire. Now the chief priest and the whole council sought witness against Jesus to put him to death, and found it not. For many bare false witness against him, and their witness agreed not together. And there stood up certain and bare false witness against him, saying, We heard him say, I will destroy this temple that is made with hands, and in 3 days I will build another made without hands. And not even so did their witness agree together. What was it exactly that Jesus had said? He did say something similar to that. You recall? John's account, chapter 2.
Destroy this temple and I'll raise it up again in 3 days.
All right, you destroy this temple and I will raise it up. And they said, we've heard him say, I will destroy this temple and in 3 days I'll build another. So they bring in witnesses on this, and they garble the thing and can't agree. And the high priest stood up in the midst and asked Jesus, saying, Answerest thou nothing? What is it which these witness against thee? And he held his peace and answered nothing. Again the high priest asked him, and saith unto him, Art thou the Christ, the Son of the Blessed? In Matthew it points out that he put him under oath. I adjure you by the living God. Tell us. And Jesus said, I am. And ye shall see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of power and coming with the clouds of heaven. Now there he identifies him as the Messiah by using two Old Testament passages. He uses two of them to identify himself as the Messiah. The first is a reference to Psalm 110 in the first verse, I think it is, where it speaks of him sitting at the right hand of God. And then the coming with the clouds of heaven is a reference to the messianic prophecy in Daniel chapter 7 verses 13 and 14. So what he does is just identify himself with these Old Testament concepts. And the high priest rent his clothes. See, he understands what Jesus is claiming. And saith, what further need have we of witnesses? Ye have heard the blasphemy, what think ye? And they all condemned him to be worthy of death. And some began to spit on him, and to cover his face, and to buffet him, and to say unto him, prophesy. And the officers received him with blows of their hands. That's clarified in another account where they've got his face covered and they're hitting him. They said, prophesy, tell us who it was that hit you. Just mocking in that way. The thing that makes this so gross is that this is partly participated in, at least by the Jewish Sanhedrin. And some of the accounts make that very clear, that they are involved in this. And what you have to imagine is the high court, the Supreme Court, treating a case like this. Man with a charge in this way. All right, we looked at the question that asked about the two stages of the trial and the political situation. And then the second question has to do with the testimony against Jesus. Explain how the testimony against Jesus actually turned out to be a vindication of him, especially in view of the diligent efforts of his enemies through much of his ministry to find some charge against him. They were watching him, see whether he would heal on the Sabbath. They were bringing all these questions in that period of controversy in the last week and trying to trip him up some way. Even before that, they had tried to trap him, to make some kind of a charge against him. But in spite of all these efforts from very early days to try to find something that they could use against him, now when finally the crunch comes and they've got him in their hands and got him on trial, and they gather witnesses and try to make a case against him, and how does it all turn out? Their best effort to get testimony against him ends up how?
They couldn't even agree on it.
Can't agree. They, in spite of this, they conjure up the case, try to put things to some kind of a case against him together, and it all just collapses of its own weight. Why does he remain silent? That's question 4. Why does he not answer the testimony against him? The high priest is saying, answerest thou nothing? What is it which these witness against thee? He held his peace and answered nothing. Why?
Probably because he figured it wouldn't have been good. Like they were lying.
There was nothing to answer. And he saw that. It just collapsed of its own weight. And what this man wants him to do is just get him to say something that what?
Will convict him.
In fact, look at the way he asked the question, what is it which these witness against thee? These fellows are clashing against each other, and he's saying, explain it to us. What is it these... Oh my, there's never been a court in a civilized country, I guess, that wouldn't see that as completely corrupt and unjust. Make the man testify against himself in that way, and finally he puts him under oath and asks him to testify against himself, and it's on that basis that they finally charge him. That's question 5. What was the charge now that they have against him, on which they say he's worthy of death?
Blasphemy.
Blasphemy. Now, in what way would this be blasphemy? What is blasphemy? The word is the meaning of it is just something like slander, but in this sort of a context, who is being slandered? God is being slandered. Blasphemy, speaking against, slandering somebody. In what way would this be blasphemy?
Placing himself equal with God or the Son of God.
Okay, now they're assuming that what is his nature? Here's a man and claiming the prerogatives of God and identifying himself with God in this way, and so they accuse him of blasphemy. Now, that is an important point to grasp, because it is perhaps the most important point in showing you the significance of the resurrection. If the Sanhedrin puts him puts him to death on the charge of blasphemy because he has claimed to be the Son of God, then when he arises from the dead by the power of Almighty God, what is the effect of that?
Shut the false. The charge is false.
All right. In fact, he's vindicated and shown to be that he was what he claimed to be. It's like an appeal to a higher court. God will not have the verdict of the Sanhedrin. He will not have it. It is an appeal to a higher court, and he overturns it. And Peter's message on Pentecost is, you've crucified him, but God has raised him from the dead. It's been appealed. It's been overturned. The verdict has, and he has been vindicated. And so the resurrection has the effect of showing that he was what he claimed to be. All right, I think we've looked at all those other things. Now, the next is chapter 14, 66 to 72, and we've got Peter's denial. If you don't have time to discuss the lessons that grow out of Peter in the previous lesson, then this will perhaps give you another chance. And as Peter was beneath in the court, there cometh one of the maids of the high priest, and seeing Peter warming himself, she looked upon him and said, Thou also wast with the Nazarene, even Jesus. But he denied, saying, I neither know nor understand what thou sayest. And he went out into the porch, and the cock crew. And the maid saw him, and began again to say to them that stood by, This is one of them. But he again denied it. And after a little while, again, they that stood by said to Peter, Of a truth thou art one of them, for thou art a Galilean. In Matthew, I think it is, they point to evidence to support this. The speech. He spoke that Galilean brogue. It's like a southerner up in the north or something. And so, see, the noose begins to tighten, and now they're calling attention to evidence. And so he has got to make it good and strong. And so he does. But he began to curse and to swear, I know not this man of whom you speak. See, to curse and to swear, that's bringing down disaster upon himself if he's not telling the truth. See? Just making it just strong as he can. Cross my heart and hope to die, except doing it like a fisherman would have done it maybe. Making it as strong as he can. And straightway the second time the cock crew. And Peter called to mind the word, how that Jesus said unto him, Before the cock crow twice, thou shalt deny me thrice. And when he thought thereon, he wept. So, you see, the very way that Jesus had made the prediction about his denial, the time element, as he mentioned it, would be something that would work in the direction of bringing him to his senses. He would hear the cock crow, and he'd just be destroyed. There's another point that's not brought out in Mark, but Luke mentions that Jesus was being brought out through the courtyard at just that time. The cock crows, and what else happens? Jesus turned and looked at Peter. Can you imagine somebody being just destroyed? Well, Peter was. And this is the first step in the direction of restoration and healing. So, there's so many valuable things to learn about Peter's denial, or when you bring the things together, at least one great lesson. What were his mistakes?
Arrogance in a way.
Yeah, it was arrogance, wasn't it? Pride, confidence in self. The whole thing has to do with their concept of the Messiah, too. Because if Jesus had encouraged him, he was ready to take up sword and defend him. He had courage. It's when he sees Jesus submitting, and it all strikes home what Jesus had been trying for, maybe we don't know exactly how long, but for a long time he's been trying to get them to see, and he's just repeating this, that he was going to be what kind of a Messiah? crucified, spiritual Messiah whose crown would come at the price of the cross. He'd go up to Jerusalem and they would not listen. He'd be put to death and he would rise from the dead, and they'd scratch their heads and they'd say, what does he mean? And they will not listen. They not just accept what he said because they got all these other notions in their head. And so, not listening, and in spite of that great vision at the transfiguration and the voice from heaven saying, you better listen to him. And with that encouragement, but they do not. And so when the time comes and not being prepared, and he said just the night before, the night of the same night here, I guess, of the betrayal and the trial, he's telling them, you're all going to fall away, you're going to stumble and be offended in me. And Peter said, no, I'll die, but I will not. And all the rest said, no, I won't either. So they won't listen. They speak contradicting the Lord. And so not listening to him, being overconfident, and as Sandy said, with an arrogance in that they will not listen to the Lord. And so they don't make use of the time. They don't go into the garden and pray like Jesus does, that they not enter into temptation, so they're not ready. It comes as a shock to them. Jesus is prepared for it, got his mind ready. He's not in panic. He's in control even during the trial. And we'll see that all the way through. But they are not ready and they panic. And he's just undone. We don't want to get caught like that. The unexpected things. We want to listen to the Lord, listen to the warnings, listen to what can happen to us, and prepare ourselves. Sandy?
Peter, I think, is a perfect example of somebody who acts without thinking something through. A lot of times he has done things rashly, without stopping and thinking what's gone through, what has just happened, or how important what Christ has said before and it's come true, and the things that he's done. He just blurts it out and just acts without even thinking.
Speak first and then think. And contradicting the Lord, and then on the mountain, not knowing what to say, but it didn't stop him from speaking. And that's right. Shows himself to be that kind of a fellow. But there's something different in this man than there was in Judas. Judas feels a kind of remorse too, and it's not one that brings him back to the Lord for forgiveness. It's a different thing. And Peter's heart is touched, and he is brought back and restored.
If I'm not mistaken, it seems that Peter is the one disciple that denies Jesus the most throughout the...
Even after Pentecost, there was one similar
thing. He denied
thing.
him the most. He denied him in Gethsemane. That night, denied allowing him to wash his feet. It just seems like over and over again he just, like you say, contradicts Jesus the whole time.
So this is the marvel of God's grace, the greatest of the saints, and needed to be saved by grace. But Jesus could use him. When finally he would come to repentance and place himself in the Lord's hand, he'd be the man, the great power on the day of Pentecost and in other situations. He could use him. But no matter how smart you are, what you got going for you, if you don't have that tender heart that can be brought to repentance and place yourself in the hand of the Lord and give yourself to him, it's all a stench, not worth anything. Okay, now Jesus is brought before Pilate. Chapter 15, verses 1 through 15. And straightway in the morning, the chief priests with the elders and scribes and the whole council held a consultation. See, this is describing the Sanhedrin in terms of its components. Chief priests, elders, scribes, the whole council, which, if I'm not mistaken, the Greek word is Sanhedrin there for council. Held a consultation and bound Jesus and carried him away and delivered him up to Pilate. And Pilate asked him, Art thou the king of the Jews? That's kind of a surprising question, and especially the tone that it takes here, but we'll look at that in a minute. And he answering saith unto him, Thou sayest. And the chief priest accused him of many things. And Pilate again asked him, saying, Answerest thou nothing? Behold, how many things they accuse thee of. But Jesus no more answered anything, insomuch that Pilate marveled. Now at the feast he used to release unto them one prisoner whom they asked of him. It would be perhaps a political prisoner, and it would be a favor to the Jewish nation that the Romans would release one. And there was one called Barabbas lying bound with them that had made insurrection, men who in the insurrection had committed murder. Now look, this man guilty of the very thing we're going to see Jesus was accused of. Guilty of the very thing. Sedition, insurrection, rebellion against Rome. And the multitude went up and began to ask him to do as he was wont to do unto them. That is, according to that custom. And Pilate answered them, saying, Will ye that I release unto you the King of the Jews? For he perceived that for envy the chief priest had delivered him up. But the chief priest stirred up the multitude that he should rather release Barabbas unto them. And Pilate again answered and said unto them, What then shall I do unto him whom ye call the King of the Jews? And they cried out again, Crucify him. And Pilate said unto them, Why? What evil hath he done? But they cried out exceedingly, Crucify him. And Pilate, wishing to content the multitude, released unto them Barabbas, and delivered Jesus, whom he had, when he had scourged him, to be crucified. The reason for this second trial before Pilate is pointed out in John 18:31. The Jews had no right to carry out the death penalty without it being approved by Rome. Another passage that gives us some insight here and helps us to understand why Pilate raises the question, Art thou the King of the Jews? Is the parallel account in Luke, which shows us the charges that the Sanhedrin had decided to make against Jesus. Luke 23, this is the fullest account of the charges that they make against him before Pilate. At verse 2, they began to accuse him, saying, now listen to these things, We found this man perverting our nation and forbidding to give tribute to Caesar. Now, in spite of the way he had actually dealt with that matter, and saying that he himself is Christ, a king. So, you see, the charges before the Sanhedrin and the charges before Pilate are some different. They are related, and they're somewhat the same, but there's a difference in tone. The charge before the Sanhedrin is blasphemy, claimed to be the divine Son, divine Messiah. But what did Pilate care about blasphemy? That was a religious thing that had to do with their law. In fact, this is what Pilate says that as I recall in John 19. He didn't care anything about blasphemy. But, so they had to make it appear that this claim to be a king involved what? Treason. In other words, a king of what kind?
Equal to Caesar.
An earthly king. One in competition with Caesar. One that the Romans would need to be concerned about. Somebody that was about to rebel against the government. So they bring that charge, and Pilate examines him. John gives the fullest account of the examination in the 18th chapter of John, and he asks him questions about this, and are you a king? And Jesus can't give a yes or no answer, because the answer is yes and no. What do you mean? Is basically what Jesus inquires into. And he is a king, but he explains what kind. He explains the spiritual nature of his kingdom. Those who bear witness to the truth, who come to the truth and listen to the truth, they make up my kingdom. And Pilate says, what is truth? I mean, that's the only kind of king you are. What do I care about anything like that? What does that amount to? Some kind of a fanatical fellow. He's a king of truth. He's not concerned about that. So Pilate quickly sees that there's nothing to this. And he admits it. I forget how many times. At least 3 times, I think. He says, I find no crime in this man. So Pilate wants to release him. this use of this custom of releasing a prisoner, Pilate thought he could release Jesus this way. You have to read this close, and I believe you see this in. We see that Barabbas was there and Jesus was there. Verse 6 points out the custom to release one at the feast, a prisoner whom they asked. And Pilate, in verse 8 is an important point, that the crowd comes up and asks Pilate to do this, to release a prisoner as he was accustomed to do to them. And Pilate answered them, saying, Will you that I release unto you the King of the Jews? Now listen to this. For he perceived that for envy the chief priest had delivered him up. Jesus had the crowds. It was envy on the part of the Jewish rulers that delivered him up. So when Pilate, when he raises these questions about using this custom, he expected the crowd to react how? He expected them to want Jesus released, didn't he? So he's wanting him released, but he does not have the courage to what? Go against the Jews. He does not want trouble. He does not want it reported back to Rome that he's not able to control this nation and keep peace and order. That's the one thing that these provincial governors, that'd get them out of there right quick if they can't keep the peace and keep order. So he does not want that going back to Rome. That's the thing they use against him. And John points that out the clearest in John the 19th chapter. But he raises the question in verse 11, points out that the chief priest had been moving out there among the multitude, get them to release Barabbas unto them, and appealing to the prejudices and maybe this man, the king, and Barabbas. Here's probably a popular figure too, man guilty of an insurrection, a leader in that, and he would have been a patriotic figure. So whatever arguments they may have used, they persuade the crowds, and the crowds ask for Barabbas to be released. Now can you imagine this? A powerful lesson on Pilate here. About the same kind of character as we saw in Herod when he had John the Baptist beheaded. He knew what was right to do, and he didn't have the moral courage to do what he understood to be right to do. So here's the governor. Can you imagine a judge now putting before the people a man that he has confessed so many times to be innocent, another man who is a known insurrectionist and murderer, and saying, which of these will you that I release? Asking a mob, and they say, well, release Barabbas, and then putting it to that crowd. What then shall I do unto him whom you call the King of the Jews? Putting it to a mob, a lynch mob. The governor, whose job was to keep the peace and the order and to do justice and to hear the case and find out what the facts were and to do justice, no matter if he had to call out Roman soldiers and kill every Jew in Palestine to protect that innocent man. Putting it to that mob. And they cried out, crucify him. And then he reasons with them. He's going to try to persuade them. Why? What evil hath he done? Try to persuade them of his innocence. They cried out exceedingly, crucify him. And so he released Barabbas and sent Jesus out to be crucified. Matthew brings out a point that's not in Mark. Brings out that bowl of water and washes his hands. That's his blood's on you. And they say his blood be on us and our children. In fact, it was. Peter charges them with it on the day of Pentecost.
One of the things that John says that must have had some weight with Pilate was that they said, if you release this man, then you aren't Caesar's friend. Yeah.
He already had charges against him. When you go into the background of this, there had been trouble, and now there's a real thing they hold over the head of Pilate, that he take this back to Rome and tell them this, and let this insurrectionist go. And so Pilate just gives in a little more and a little more. They hold their ground. They're demanding and keep the same position. And he gives in a little more, and just caves into them and will not stand and do what he understands to be right. There's a great evangelistic type question to raise on verse 12. He said, when he puts it to them, what is to be done then with Jesus? We know what Judas did with him. We know what Peter did with him. We know what the Jews did with him. We know what Pilate did with him. What will you do with Jesus? That's a sermon that calls for a decision. And you've got people that are ready to obey. That'll get them to make up their minds. In 16 to 20, the mocking of Jesus, Pilate turns him over to the soldiers. They clothe him with purple in verse 17, plaiting a crown of thorns. They put it on him. They began to salute him. Hail, King of the Jews! All this just making fun. They smote his head with a reed and spat upon him, and bowing their knees worshipped him. Another account says that reed, they put the reed in his hand. This is the king's scepter. So the purple robes, this old soldier's faded old coat, put that on him. The purple. King's got to have a crown. Crown of thorns, put that down on his head. Bow down before him, says they worshipped him. They paying homage, acknowledge him as a king. Put a reed, the ruler's scepter in his hand. Then they take it away from him, hit him on the head, and bow down before him. Hail, King of the Jews! There's some suggestive thoughts to raise there about a person pretending to pay homage to Jesus as Lord and King while refusing him what is due, a Lord and a King. In Luke 6:46, Jesus says, why call you me Lord, Lord, and do not the things that I say? There are a lot of people doing this today. They call Jesus Lord. They bow down before him. They clothe him in purple. They say the things, and they refuse to give him their hearts, their lives, their wills will not bend before him. They will not obey, and it's just a fraud and a pretense, as it was in this case. In verse 21, and they compel one passing by, Simon of Cyrene, coming from the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to go with them that he might bear his cross. By the way, this explains the passage in the Sermon on the Mount where it says, one compel you to go 1 mile, go with him too. Here's an example of that. The Romans, they just grab a fellow out of the crowd and just, what do you call it? Not requisition, but press him into service. You do this. Get in that cross. John in John 19:17 points out that Jesus went out bearing the cross for himself. Can you put these two together? What's evidently happened? He's been kept up all night, it looks like, and beaten, and he finally can't bear that cross. They take this fellow. This must have been a familiar figure. It says the father of Alexander and Rufus. At least Alexander and Rufus must have been somebody that the Christians would know. And this man is identified in that way then. All right, then the crucifixion, 22 to 32. And they bring him unto the place Golgotha, which is being interpreted the place of a skull. And they offered him wine mingled with myrrh, but he received it not. That would have been a drug, a merciful thing to prevent the pain from being quite so bad. But he refused it. He is going to go through the whole thing with a clear head. He will know every step of the way what is going on. And they crucify him and part his garments among them, casting lots upon them what each should take. And it was the 3rd hour, and they crucified him. We go so much into these things and make so much of the pain that is involved in that. The Gospels don't do that. They don't go into great detail about what that was like. Just a simple statement. They crucified him. we may be putting the emphasis on the wrong thing. And the superscription of his accusation was written over and put up over his head, the King of the Jews. And with him they crucified two robbers, one on his right hand, one on his left. Verse 28, the King James probably has, and it's in some manuscripts and not in others here. The scripture was fulfilled which saith, and he was reckoned with transgressors. Now that is definitely a part of the text in Luke. That's probably how it got to be here. Some copyist saw it in Luke and just inserted it when in copying this. Verse 29, and they that passed by railed on him, wagging their heads, and saying, Ha! Thou that destroyest the temple, and buildest it in 3 days, save thyself, come down from the cross. In like manner also the chief priests, mocking him among themselves with the scribes, said, He saved others, himself he cannot save. Can you imagine now Supreme Court justices? This is their dignity. I'll tell you, this is a low point in the history of the Jewish nation. It shows you what the nation was like. Let the Christ, the King of Israel, now come down from the cross, that we may see and believe. And they that were crucified with him reproached him. See, they that were crucified with him, the two thieves, both of them evidently did it first. And Luke points out that one of them came to repentance. Our time is running short on us, but the questions bring out some things that some attention should be given to. What would be indicated about the death of Jesus from the fact that two robbers were crucified at the same time, one on each side of him? Here he is on the cross, and on one side there is one thief. On the other side there is another thief. Okay, what does that say about the manner of his death? Something more than that, though.
But he was treated as a criminal.
Yeah.
Just
A
like
thief on
anybody
each
else
side.
was crucified.
A thief on each side, and dying a criminal's death. And in fact, in a much higher sense, he bears the sins of mankind when he dies on that cross. So it's a torturous death, but humiliation, and the criminal's death that he dies. Then the second point under this makes some interesting practical points, I think. The mockery heaped upon Jesus shows the false views of the Messiah held by the mockers. They had their own ideas about the Messiah and thought sure that if Jesus were really the Messiah, he would not be in his present position. If you are really the Messiah, then what? All right. Come down from this cross. They could not conceive of a Messiah, what? On the cross. Crucified. And this remains the great stumbling block for the Jews with these preconceptions about the nature of the Messiahship. Misunderstanding of that. Well, I'd ask a question that I don't have time to give you to do much with. Are there other instances in which people have tried to force Jesus into some kind of false position or role? See, they have their own ideas about the Messiah. If he was the Messiah, this is the way he would act. Well, what about Peter? Jesus said, I'll have to go up to Jerusalem and be crucified, be rejected. Peter said what? It'll never happen. Be it far from thee, Lord. That just didn't fit his ideas of the Messiah at all. The soldiers in their mocking way, the purple robe, all of the, can't think of my words tonight, all of the things that attend the royalty, make him a king here, put him in a false position. The Jews who wanted to make him a king in John 6:15, they saw him make the bread, or multiply the loaves and fishes and feed the multitude. They said, this is of the truth, the prophet come into the world. They were going to take him by force and make him king. Everybody wanted to put him in a false position. And then the Jews just generally. And so when Jesus did not fulfill the expectations of the people, they rejected him. and I believe it is indeed true, there's a lesson here we need to take to heart. How must Jesus be approached? For one thing, without what? Preconceptions. And just coming to him, and how must he be accepted? Oh, yeah, and for what he is. Accept him, not some concoction of your own mind that you're going to call Jesus, that you're going to recognize as the Messiah. Oh, everybody in the world would accept Jesus if you could change him into what they want. But the ones that will be saved will be the ones who will come to him with faith and trust and just bow the knee before him as he is. Then question 3, why did Jesus submit to the mockery was on the cross while he was on the cross? Could he not have saved himself? They said, if you're the Messiah, come down from the cross. Could he not have come down from the cross?
He could, but he couldn't.
Could have called me.
What did yeah, that's what he told Peter.
But there's some parallel there about with Jesus and when he was tempted on the, in the wilderness too for the 40 days.
Yeah.
There seems to be a lot of parallel.
You can escape all this just real easy.
Yeah, just throw yourself down. The angels will save you.
Exactly right. They're just repeating the temptation of the wilderness. Escape the human condition. Save yourself. Back there that early, Satan was telling him the same thing. You can be a king right now. Just give me homage, and you won't have to go to the cross. That's what that was all about. And I think Diane raised a good point there, and I've let it slip my mind.
Legions of angels?
Yeah, the point Jesus made in the garden when Peter took the sword, he said, don't you know I could call 12 legions of angels? He could not, though, come down from the cross and at the same time what?
Obey God.
Obey God and what else?
Remove the sins and fulfill the
Save us. Save us. Himself he cannot save. He could not save himself and at the same time
fulfill the promises.
save us. He couldn't save himself from that death and at the same time save us. In 33 to 41, his death is reported. And when the 6th hour was come, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. Verse 32 points out, excuse me, I got the wrong verse. Verse 25, it was the 3rd hour when they crucified him. The 3rd hour, now the 6th hour, there was darkness over the whole land until the 9th hour. Perhaps an eclipse, just the most fitting thing in the world to happen at this hour, wasn't it? And at the 9th hour, Jesus cried with a loud voice, Eloi, Eloi, lama sabachthani, which is being interpreted, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? You've abandoned me to this. And some of them that stood by when they heard it said, behold, he calleth Elijah. They just picked up a little bit on that first part. And one ran, and filling a sponge full of vinegar, put it on a reed and gave him to drink, saying, let us see whether Elijah cometh to take him down. Another account points out that Jesus had asked for a drink. I thirst. And they gave him to drink. And I think it was for the very reason so he could do. He's going to take that drink, then he's going to die. But look what happens. And Jesus uttered a loud voice and gave up the ghost. When to clear up his mouth and to be able to die with a shout of triumph. John says, what was his last word? It is finished. He dies with a cry of victory. Gave up the ghost. The veil of the temple was rent in two from the top to the bottom. And when the centurion who stood by over against him saw that he so gave up the ghost, he said, truly this man was the Son of God. And there were also women beholding from afar, among whom were both Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James the Less, and of Joseph and Salome, who, when he was in Galilee, followed him and ministered unto him, and many other women that came up with him unto Jerusalem. Now, we don't have time to do it, but you need to turn to these passages in Hebrews and learn the significance of this tearing of the veil. That's interpreted in Hebrews. The veil is said to be his flesh. The veil that separated holy place, from Holy of Holies. And as long as that was standing there, Hebrews says, the way into the holy place, the presence of God, has not been made manifest. But when His veil, when His flesh is rent, that veil is rent, and it tells us the meaning of the death. Now what? The way has been made manifest into the holy place. And then one other point here on this. The confession of the centurion. I don't know how deeply he understood. He may have been thinking of Son of God in a lesser sense. They had all kind of mythology about the gods coming and cohabiting with women and those kind of things, and people being sons of God, and the emperor was the son of God and all like that. But maybe in a higher sense than he even understood what he was saying, this serves as a climax of this book when you remember the way it began by saying this is the gospel of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, and begins with those testimonies of John the Baptist identifying Him as the Messiah, the voice from heaven, this is my Son in whom I'm well pleased. And now what a climactic thing when He dies. And after all that we've seen, as He's shown Himself by word and by work, and finally at His death, this old hardened Roman centurion, I say hardened, maybe not, but he sees these things and he says, truly this man was the Son of God. Climax. The whole book has tended to lead us to voice such a confession concerning Jesus.